I was quite excited about what we were trying to achieve with this summit. Because I've worked in this area as a journalist for 25 years and written about pensions and written about payroll and written about benefits, just seeing it all coming together and the silos beginning to break down, I thought was a very interesting time in the world of workplace pensions. And clearly in this room, as I said earlier, we are a mix of people, predominantly reward and benefit professionals. And I think having this wider view that you as HR, reward, benefits in particular can bring to pensions is going to be so important for the future development of workplace pensions. So in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to take you on a very whistle-stop tour of the history of pensions, only because I found some nice pictures on the internet. So don't worry, I won't bore you too long about history, but I find it always intriguing. But how we've adapted over time. Quickly, I'm going to tap in then to the 21st century game changer, auto-enrolment, which is probably where a lot of you might have found yourselves dealing with pensions for the first time. Cover who's in charge now, bit of a spoiler alert, it's you lot. It's increasingly going to be all of you. And then finish with some of the changing workforce influences and economic influences and what's coming next. And I think, again, that's going to come more and more from the reward, benefits, and HR side. So quick whiz-bang tour through history. In the 20th century, we start to see a ramping up of pensions activity at the state level. I did have a slide before this about medieval times. I thought, no, I've got not enough time to go way back centuries. But what I wanted to flag up here is in the Old Age Pensions Act, back then it was the state pensions age was 70, which is always interesting when you think about where we are today. Then we get to workplace pensions, and they start to take off. And why is that? Tax incentives. All of you work in benefits know that good old tax incentive is always a good way to get something boosted in the workplace. And that came in the Finance Act of 1921. Then I think you're probably aware, in 1948, the basic state pension comes into play. Kind of recognizable in its shape today. I bet you they didn't have the triple lock back then, though. But interesting, I wanted to flag up there that age and gender split that comes in at that stage, and which we are still unpicking today. Second half of the 20th century, raft after raft of legislation starts to come in, for better or for worse. So sadly, it was essential. Robert Maxwell and other fraudulent people keen to get their hands on people's money. That hasn't gone away today. The difference more and more as we go forward is that money and the decision over money as it stands at the moment will sit in the hands of employees as they decumulate. So I'm very aware of that as an issue that may or may not come up in our discussions today. But this added lots and lots of complications, as needed as this was, and what you start to see is employers, private sector employers, moving away from DB pensions. And in fact, the stat I heard this many years ago, DB pensions peaked way back in 1967, which is, if you haven't heard that before, it's always a bit of a surprise. And obviously, a long, long time ago, I know that because that's the year I was born. That's how long it's been that they've been in decline. I, of course, haven't been in decline. And then we get to 2019 is when we see that tipping point. For the first time, employee participation in DC schemes just tips over employee participation in DB schemes. I'm not talking money. The money's still in DB schemes right now. There's a big disparity there. But that's where you can see the shift. Rolling forward onto the 21st century, and I think many of you in the room will remember the Turner Review. I was still working as a journalist and editor at that point, reporting on it. Why weren't people saving enough? We got longer working lives. What are the implications? And that ultimately, long story short, led to many things, including auto-enrolment. And the first of the large organizations started implementing auto-enrolment 11 years ago. And you had at that point suddenly payroll departments also having to be pulled in on the act to make sure that that was done. Again, I remember that really well because they were all tied up with real-time reporting. Didn't really want to know about this other auto-enrollment thing they had to do at the same time. But we managed to get it all done. And luckily, everybody sorted out all the technical software from real-time reporting to auto-enrolment. And fast forward 10 years, I got these stats off the ONS. So by 2021, you see the massive difference. So on the chart, the top green bar is if we put everybody's, all types of pensions collectively, this is how many, the portion of employees now in pension plans, and there's a nice uptick from 2012 onwards. The other lines, you're looking at the different types of schemes, the dark blue line, DB schemes, you can see just slowly going down, but slowly but steadily. Occupational DC growth happening there, ditto with your personal pension stakeholder and SIPs growing there. I've put up there the men and women participation rates. We're aware, even though the participation rates might look okay at surface, there's clearly big disparities, which I will come back to shortly. Now, it appeared that pensions went a bit quiet over COVID, especially for those of you who have a reward benefit pensions background. You're probably much more involved with employee well-being and people working from home and all those kind of things. But in the background, things were still ticking along with people in the pensions industry scratching their heads and thinking about what needs to change. And hence, we have these raft of consultations that have been out this year that we will start to see what implications they might have. But the first one that came through this week, you may have noticed that the Pension Extension Automatic Enrolment Bill, I had to read that one because it doesn't trip off the tongue exactly, received royal assent this week. If I've read right, and we can find out from the experts later, there's still to be a consultation on implementation. I'm looking at Emma as my expert that I can spot. So that could be a question we ask later. So you don't have to rush off right this minute, but just be aware that will be coming down the line. And as I said, there's a King's Speech on the 7th of November, so who knows what else might be arriving this year. But there are still disparities. So this is, I took this off this ONS data looking at the average value of a public sector pension pot versus the average value of a private sector pensions pot, and broadly public sector DB, broadly private sector DC. And so while auto-enrolment's been a fantastic start, on average, it's just the values aren't big enough. It's not going to give most private sector DC employees what they need in the long term. So what now? Well, I wanted to also do the follow the money, have a look at where things are shifting to. DC assets in 2021, 500 billion. By 2030, to be $1 trillion. Now, I can't even get my head around. I just know that's an enormous, enormous shift. And I think every pension provider in this room, every consultant, every expert is very aware of that. And how will that look going forward, and what will their products and consulting need to be telling you as employers, and what will you as employers need to bear in mind, that much money coming through. But I want to again just flag up, there's also nefarious forces out there of fraudsters, and it worries me that so many employees are making their own decisions at the moment. But also, what is value? Because there are lots of very good value schemes out there, and hopefully many of those providers are with us today, but not all schemes and not all plans available out there offer the same level of value, and that is a lot of money not to be getting the best value. The buy-in, buyout markets have been phenomenally busy. There was some research out yesterday from Hymans Robertson just talking about record levels of buy-in and buyout. We know there's been quite a lot of change towards master trusts as well. So that flight to consolidation is the name of the game at the moment. And perhaps we can discuss this morning and in your workshops later this afternoon, are you consolidating in the right direction? Or have you consolidated in the right direction, and to whose best interest? And that's before I even talk about multiple pensions pots that your employees have got and the consolidation around that. There's a lot of talk in the ether about consolidation. Now I want to talk a bit about I've talked about what your job titles look like, but many of you kindly filled in a survey, and in the back of your event guides, we've got the results of that short survey, just of the profile of the audience today. And I know you're a particular group because you're not primarily DB pension managers. Some of you are pension managers, some of you are DB, but broadly you are reward and benefits DC. And what we can see in this audience is just under half of you have group personal pensions as your primary pension for your auto-enrolment. We've got just under a third who currently have master trusts, and then you can see the single employed DC trusts, SIPs, and stakeholder in there. So that's the shape of what our audience looks like today, and I think it's indicative of how things may go in the future. I'd be interested to see how that master trust does or doesn't change going forward, one for debate. But you've also got a fair amount of responsibility. So what we found in this particular survey is you're a pretty powerful group of people. We found that over half of you are the decision maker in your organization for your pension. And then we've got 44% of you who say you're a key influencer. Maybe it's your CFO signing it off, maybe it's your HR director, but probably if you're in the room today, you're pretty involved with your pension. So that influence is pretty powerful. Also, collectively, the employers in this room are responsible for nearly £2 billion worth of pension contributions going into your pensions at your organizations every year. That is a very powerful group of people we're sitting here, responsible for a lot of money and a lot of employees' future lives. So not wanting to terrify you completely, but there is a responsibility that's at this stage that you do have. This is not a tick box exercise, and I know many of you want to do what's right for your employees. And perhaps as the day goes by, some of the more technical consultations and things that are coming in, you might not have been aware of, because I know you're grappling with pay increases and inflation and all sorts of other things, and that's why we brought you here today, just to go, and some stuff that's coming down the line, and I'm going to let our speakers today inform you a bit more of those. So you've got them in the back of your mind as you're making your strategic decisions. And that's really the point of a summit like this. But also, what this means for workplace pensions, you are more reliant on your consultants. You are more reliant on your providers. And it's incredible when I speak to them just how much they have to offer. And often employers don't use all the options that those providers and consultants have on offer. So do rely on them. But you need to be comfortable with the consultant and the provider that you are working with. You need to trust them. You need to be working with people that really understand your goals and objectives and that they can align with your company culture. And I know I've certainly spoken to some of you who've landed up in new jobs and I've gone, oh, I'm not sure we've got the right people. So this is, again, a good place to come, have a chat, see if you're right in your gut feeling, or whether you maybe need to have a think about who you're working with, because those relationships are going to be more and more important. And particularly because quite a few of you I've spoken to have told me that you miss having that in-house pensions manager. Some of you have been pensions manager. You're probably feeling quite secure at the moment, and hopefully you can share some insights with your colleagues here today. But others have suddenly found themselves as the only person in the company responsible for pensions and very reliant on your consultant and your provider. Interestingly, in this research we did, we found that 85% of you said that robust workplace pensions governance is important. And I wanted to flag that up because some of you who I've spoken to recently who come from a pensions background have gone, absolutely, we've got a governance committee. Never mind what our provider does and everything else, we want to make sure it's robust. And others perhaps over time have not got that. And I think that might be coming higher on the agenda. So you as reward benefits HR people, you might go, oh, but pensions are complicated. Yes, they are, but I think this is where the game changer comes in. The knowledge that you have and can bring to this table can actually make such a difference in moving the dial. I think some of the things that you think about is where the friction, the difficult points have been up till now. And this is why today at this conference, we'll be talking about things that perhaps you won't see at a traditional pensions conference. So for example, I know lots of you are looking at working parents. So the pension, that is where you often see that big gap open up when people take time to go work part-time or take time off for parental leave. But if you look at it holistically, there's a lot you could be doing in terms of your HR policies and the benefits and the support that you're very familiar with that actually make a big difference long-term to those people's pensions. Carers, that's become a rising issue. We now have legislation for carers leave. Again, that's on many people's agendas, and with an aging workforce, that comes up again. What happens with their pensions? Gender and ethnicity pay gaps. I know lots of you have been working on that in recent years. Of course, there's that connection through to pension contributions. Many of you have ESG targets as part of your goals for the coming year, and how that plays through, especially the S into employee well-being and broader financial well-being. It's that bigger picture view that you bring to pensions that's going to really help change some of that sustainable pension savings for your employees in the future. And this is where your bigger picture expertise could really help the pensions. And just to delve into a bit more detail, the latest DWP figures show that the gender pensions pay gap is 35%. Massive when you compare it to the gender pay gap, which is 8.3%. Still too big, but that pensions gap is huge. And if you read the latest Scottish Widows report on the gender pensions gap, one of the things they really flag up is the impact of the labour market on creating those big differences. If you think about who is on 0 hours contracts, who's lower paid, and so on, this is a labour market issue. So this is something that HR gets very involved with, Reward gets very involved with, which plays back on the pensions, not purely for the pensions industry to solve on its own. We do need that bigger picture thinking. But even beyond gender, many employers are wanting to achieve greater fairness. And I found these stats from the Legal and General Investment Managers report this year absolutely shocking. 7 out of 10 minority ethnic people have no pension pot at all. And among those who do, on average, it is less than half the average white British person's pensions pot. So much more work needs to be done. And many of you, again, are targeted. You've got DI objectives. You're trying to align your strategies to DI and your corporate DI goals. Another area to look at when it comes to that. And don't forget the pensions for all groups. Now, I would be remiss not to talk about longer working lives, the 100-year life. I'm sure many of you have either read or heard of the book by Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott dealing with how our careers are going to be different, how we're going to work differently because we are working for longer and people are going to be working past age 64, 65, which are the current average ages for women and men respectively. We ran a report which we published a couple of days ago in association with Aviva, and we've got them all on your seats this morning, starting to unpack some of the implications of longer working lives and what this means for employers, your workforce planning, your future skills, but also the implications for pensions and pensions savings. We're starting off this conversation. We'll be doing a lot of that today, and I think there's a long way still to go of what that might look like when somebody walks into your HR department and goes, when can I retire? And they might not even know what their pension pot looks like at that stage. And really, longer working lives is going to impact your workforce planning, as I've said, but your risk insurance costs. What's that going to do with your health and well-being of your older employees? People potentially accessing their pension while still working for you, and what that the technicalities around that. Attitudes to leave are changing because people are working for longer. They might want to take sabbaticals. They might want to take breaks to study and reskill. you've got parental leave, you've got carer leaves. All of those play through into pension savings and what people's outcomes are going to look like. So plenty to discuss in our panels today. Now, we can't ignore the cost of living and the impact of inflation. It might have come down. It's not rising as fast as it was back in October last year when it was good to 11 point something %. But it's still impacting employees' pockets, but all of your pockets, as I don't need to tell you when it comes to your pay budgets and how those link then through to pension contributions. And here's a sneak preview, which I haven't warned my team I was going to do a sneak preview, but we've got a new report coming out in October, in a few weeks' time, that we've done in association with Mercer Marsh Benefits. We'll be doing a series looking at transforming engagement as businesses change. And the one that's coming out next is looking at people risk. And we found that a lot of you said, and several hundred other people who filled in the survey, top line, the wage inflation is a current people risk. But when we had a look down at the impact on workplace pensions cost, lots of people aren't seeing that as a risk. There might be lots of reasons for that, but it did make us stop and pause to think of, hang on, if wages are linked to contributions, why is that happening? Is it something we've missed, or is it perhaps a little bit of silo thinking of the impact of one on the other? Now, I just wanted to quickly say we can't talk about pensions without talking about some of the other things impacting some of your millennials and Gen Zs, which will be student debt. I know a minority of people go on to study tertiary level, but this obviously, you can see the massive change. The red line is student loan debt in England. The purple line, which has now changed to brown on this slide, inconveniently, that's Wales. The green one is Northern Ireland, and the bottom line is Scotland. But you can see the upward trajectory in recent years has been absolutely huge. And also the housing market. I know we're going to touch on this in the panel just before lunchtime and talking a bit more about if you've got people who are retiring that are still renting or paying off mortgages, the implications then. So I don't want to preempt that too much, but I did want to flag up. Many of you will have younger employees who are not on the housing ladder yet, and those who are renters are financially 5 times more vulnerable than those who own their properties outright. So I think that's one of the things that has to feed into when you're thinking about your financial well-being strategy, and broader than pensions, they're all interplay with each other, particularly as people get older and older to get onto the housing ladder. Again, breaking embargoes ever so slightly, but we've got our financial well-being research that we do in association with Wealth at Work coming out next week on Tuesday. And lots of fascinating stats and data in there. But one of the things that we ask people is, do you have lots of financial well-being offerings, and are they in a cohesive strategy? Because we've seen with employee well-being, there was a time when there weren't that many people doing it strategically. Now it's much more strategic. Financial well-being at the moment isn't strategic. It's still pretty scattered. Your pensions over there, the company secretary looks after share schemes, loans are over here, and your employee discounts and life stage benefits are somewhere else at all. But almost 3/4 of you are saying that in the next 2 years, you're planning to bring those close together into a strategy. I'd be surprised if everybody had it done in 2 years. I've done these kind of surveys for too long, but that's the direction of travel. And I think that is where we're going to start to see pensions coming in, that people actually bring it together collectively and in a cohesive manner, so you can make sure that your older workers, your younger workers, your female workers, ethnic minorities, everybody's actually looked after in a sustainable way for them. And they can enjoy their careers however they play out differently over the decades to come. And they've got money for adequate pensions later on. So that was my very high-level skim across the top of what I call my state of the nation of pensions. That quick look back at the 20th century to understand where we were then to what's coming through now, what to watch out for. We touched on the 21st century game changer of auto-enrolment and the fact that there's still refinements coming through, and will we see auto-enrolment 2.0 coming through at some point? Who knows? I pointed out that you guys are kind of in charge now, or certainly have a very big role to play with what you can bring to the table to help change the dial on pensions. We at REBA will continue to do research on so many different angles to try and provide you with the data you need in your organizations to make those decisions, to tell your leadership what needs to have, what needs to change, what will be positive, and what's coming down the line. As for what's next, I think consolidation, 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 be it small pots, be it master trust, be whatever it is coming down the line, but watch out for value. And yeah, let's see what the King's speech will bring on the 7th of November, whether we're going to have a busy year, few years of pensions on our plates coming up.